Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Onward webinar, part two of a two-part series on science superpower, on the UK's global science ambitions beyond Horizon Europe, whether that's kind of in or Horizon Plan B. As I say, this is part two. Part one was yesterday morning. The Science Minister, George Freeman, joined us for a keynote speech in which he set out his ambitions for the UK's science and technology strategy in the coming decades, and what he thought some of the key opportunities and challenges were, and hinted at the fact that one of the very live debates going on in government at the moment is around our association with Horizon Europe and similar bodies, and made very clear that while it was the government's intention to associate and to become a partner with Horizon, and their desire at the moment, that it was only prudent to begin considering what a plan B would look like. And so we thought it was useful to pull together this webinar with a range of experts from the world of science and technology, both in academia and commercially, many people here crossing kind of public, private, and third sectors, to consider what the success criteria are for our international ambitions. What should we be benchmarking membership of Horizon against, and what sort of questions should we be considering? I'm Adam Hawksby. I'm Deputy Director of Onward, lead a lot of our work on science and technology along with our team. And I'll be working with our team to turn the contributions from this session and the speech yesterday into a pamphlet that we'll publish after and share with everyone who's been able to join. But there are a range of contributions that are coming from our panel today, so I'm not going to spend too much longer hogging the session. We have with us today Professor Sir John Bell, Regent Professor at the University of Oxford, Tabitha Goldstone, the Chair of the UK's AI Council, Lord David Willett, I believe, will be joining us shortly. He might just be dashing over from the House of Lords. James Phillips, a former science advisor in number 10 in Downing Street during the Boris Johnson administration. Priya Guha, who was a previous Consul General to San Francisco, as sort of ambassador to Silicon Valley, that bridge between the UK and the US tech sectors. And finally, Richard Jones from the University of Manchester, both a kind of scientist and physicist in his own right, but also a lead on Greater Manchester's innovation and science ambitions. Fantastic panel. We're really grateful to have them. How this is going to work is each speaker is going to give a short provocation, some opening remarks in which they're going to make clear what they think some of the key considerations are around our science superpower ambitions and Horizon. So we'll go through each speaker first for around 4 to 5 minutes. I'm going to be quite strict on that 5 minutes, so you might see me waving just to indicate that they'll need to wrap up those opening remarks. And then we'll come over to you. So you'll see that you've got a Q&A function. Please do put questions in that function, and I'll make sure that after everyone's had their chance to make some opening contributions, that we come across to you and your questions, and I'll direct those to members of the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker to give his remarks, Professor Sir John Bell. John.
Great, thanks very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And it's a great topic to talk about, because I think for the UK to become a science superpower isn't actually optional. The truth is, if we don't become a superpower, we're going to be in all kinds of trouble, because this is probably the only way for us to generate the kind of productivity and economic growth to remain a leading country in the world. So I think that should be the starting point. Now, of course, I live in a world of life sciences, and in that space, we've got a pretty strong position globally already. We've got a number of really successful big companies. We've got a cluster of emerging and developing SMEs, particularly in the areas of cancer and digital as applied to healthcare related stuff. We've got a strong academic base. Some of the best universities in the medical research arena are here in the UK. We've got strong charity cluster, and they're all really good sources of funding. So that should be okay. But the reality is, I think what I'd like to talk very briefly about is that this is a dynamic space. And I think we have a rather classical approach to science in this country. It's largely in the academic setting, largely based on peer review, response mode funding. And That is, of course, crucially important, and I wouldn't want to dismiss that. It's been the fundamentals of how we build our science base. But it's now also become clear that other forms of science funding are really crucial if you're going to be able to advance these fields quickly. And there's this concept of mission-based funding, which is not really about getting a response mode grant, going off doing some work, writing a paper. It's about trying to head towards a result which actually makes a difference in the field you're in. So it's actually directionally based. It's what industry does a lot of. So most industries are very mission-based, but the academic space, it doesn't really have funding available to allow it to be mission-based. And I've had this experience recently with our life sciences strategy, where we put out a set of missions. And it's been interesting to see how puzzled people are by how you might actually work together in an interdisciplinary fashion to solve big problems that would involve the access to technology as well as its application more widely across the space. So I would argue that this is a domain that we need to develop. I think we've got enough response mode funding out there. I think what we need to do is think harder about how do we work together to solve big problems. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. We're now currently trying to solve the problem of how do you diagnose cancer early so that you treat people early, you get more survival, successful survival data. And there are technologies to do that, but that's required a big effort from academics, industry, all working together to try and solve that problem with new bits of technology. Similarly, a couple of the other projects that we've run in the UK, Genomics England, the 100,000 Genomes Project, was very much a mission-driven project. And you will have seen we've signed an interesting set of deals around cancer vaccines, which again is mission-driven. It isn't sort of exploratory science. It isn't response mode funding. We need to see whether you can stimulate an immune response to people's personalized cancers to be able to give them a response. So I would argue that one of the things we need to think about doing going forward in or out of Horizon is how do we better incentivize and fund mission-based research to lie alongside response mode research. So that would be my initial pitch.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Next up, we're going to move to Tabitha Goldstaff. Tabitha, Chair of the UK AI Council, founder of CogX, real leader in the fields of machine learning, automation, robotics, etc. So Tabitha, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. I'm also the new Exec Director of Innovate Cambridge. So I have a new hat and the author of How to Talk to Robots. So I thought it would be good to talk to you about with all of those hats on today, as well as my AI Council hat. What keeps me awake at night is this fact that the UK has 7 years to contribute to keeping the global average temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees. And that we must do that in a post-pandemic world with increasing geopolitical tensions, with an education system that isn't fit for an AI age, an NHS and social care system, which we know is under strain. And we need to narrow the gap between the experience of the richest and poorest in ensuring the economy prospers. How we do all of that, as John said, there's really no choice. The UK needs to be a science and technology superpower. And I feel really lucky to be part of a community that thinks about that every day. And so whether in or out of Horizon Europe, the challenge remains the same. These are huge global problems and opportunities, and we can't solve or capture them alone. So I really look forward to increased collaboration with Europe and the rest of the world regardless. What I think needs to be done, well, first, with my Chair of the AI Council hat on, I really welcome George's continued energy and commitment to science and AI in his talk yesterday. The AI community permeates across the whole of science and the tech landscape, and I believe really supports the UK to be a thriving example of what makes a science superpower. The challenge now is maintaining this and also ensuring we become, and actually George describes it as an innovation nation. The National AI Strategy does go some way to highlighting how we could achieve this. And so I thought it might be useful, maybe even as a blueprint, to talk about those three pillars. So the first one will already be described a lot today: infrastructure, compute, talent, data, the kind of fundamental long-term requirements. And at the moment, there's a race for a UK foundational AI model, for example, that will really galvanize and speed up activity in all of those areas. The third pillar in the strategy is around regulation, ensuring the UK gets the governance of AI right. But the second pillar I'm most keen to pick up on, because this is about, as John actually mentioned, the mission-driven approach. The key here is how we encourage the diffusion of AI across the economy. We need to increase the adoption of the innovations. We can't just be at a place of invention. And this is right, this work, we need to think about small business, medium business, large business, all becoming innovation nations almost within themselves. And we need collaboration in order to do that, both locally and nationally. Which brings me on to my second hat, the thriving cluster of Cambridge. So I'm 8 days into my new role as Exec Director of Innovate Cambridge, and I can feel the power of the Golden Triangle and the weight of responsibility. So I won't say much on that, and actually make my last point as the author of How to Talk to Robots. Because I think there is a big area of the science superpower narrative that's way overlooked. And I want the UK to be the place where the benefits from science and innovation are better distributed and truly felt by the general public. We need to continue to renew our social license to operate while we think about how to build a science superpower. And if we don't, we won't have that ability to do so, because a different outcome to this dystopian future, which a lot of people think about and hear when they hear science superpowers, it requires different choices and a different distribution of power. We need to design processes around the strength and fragilities of humans, with ways for them to voice their problems, propose solutions, and claim a share of the productivity gains. So what I'm kind of proposing today is that every time we think of innovation nation, what if we think about innovation for the nation and global science social power? Because maybe that could go some way to readdressing the existing exasperating inequalities and build a brighter future for everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tabitha. So questions already coming in. So please do keep them coming in as people are speaking. If thoughts come to you, I'll go to those questions right at the end, but clearly a few of you are already jumping in, which is fantastic. You should have that functionality at the bottom. James, let's turn to you. James, formerly of Number 10, Science Advisor there, working on some of the policy environment that we're now beginning to see emerge. So it'd be great to get your thoughts on global science beyond after with Horizon Europe. So James.
Great, and thank you for having me. And I'll echo a lot of what has been said already. I think that the critical point that I want to make is that the institutions of science have not kept pace with the changes in how science and technology is operating over the last 30 years, and that we need to create new kinds of institutions and funding approaches, partly along the lines of what John said, that are particularly attractive to global junior talent. And I'll go through why I think that now. I think there's three major things which come to mind when I think about the UK science and technology over the next 10 years. I think the first is the need to benchmark ourselves against the very best science and technology ecosystems in the world. I think we've had decades of underinvestment in science and technology. I think we still underinvest. And I think if you look at the very cutting edge of things like synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, quantum in places like the Bay Area, like Boston, I think they're significantly ahead of the quality in Europe. And I'll be putting some analysis out with Professor Paul Nightingale from Sussex shortly, looking at the very most impactful papers in those fields and showing that Europe is quite some way behind, including the United Kingdom. The second is there's been dramatic change in how science and technology works over the last 20, 25 years. Science now is much more interdisciplinary. It's much more multimodal. A given paper in synthetic biology from the Broad Institute could have molecular biology advances, synthetic biology advances, robotics advances, material science advances, artificial intelligence advances, all being brought to bear on a problem. And that kind of science is quite challenging to do in a conventional academic department on conventional academic grants. And yet we haven't seen a shift in how we support science towards that team-based approach. It's no longer possible for a scientist to know everything about what's going on in a paper. There's simply too many skills required. Thirdly, when I think about our strategy, we need to think not only about what are we weak at, but what other countries are weak at and what niches we could exploit. And the thing which comes to mind most strongly is the terrible situation for junior scientists globally. There's an enormous pool of talented people around the world for whom the existing scientific structures don't work. Nowadays, at the age when people like Marie Curie, Lovelace, Francis Crick, Newton, Einstein were doing their best work, nowadays they would be slaves working in a lab, doing work for people who may not have touched a test tube in 20 years. I think this was an eccentric view 5 years ago, but now we're seeing increasing despondency amongst junior scientists, including in, being published in Nature and so on. But this is an amazing resource. We should be creating institutions to attract them. So what does this look like in terms of what we should be investing in? Well, alongside the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, one of the things we tried to push was the creation of what Rob Miller and Owen O'Sullivan call disruptive innovation labs. These would be environments that are centered on the intersection between science and technology, science and engineering in a given domain of science. For example, you might have an area, an organization focusing on the brain-body connection, or in a particular area of synthetic biology, not structured like an academic department, but structured more like something like DeepMind. There's a tremendous amount of attention on what Google DeepMind is doing and the transformative impact it's having. There's almost no attention paid to the fact that Google DeepMind is structured very, very, very differently to how conventional academic departments are structured, or how most of the organizations which are funded through public R&D are structured. And likewise, if we go back to the origins of molecular biology, of telecommunications, of personal computing, we see organizations like the early LMB, like Xerox PARC, like Bell Labs, which again look very different to conventional academia and are much more oriented to bringing together discovery science, invention, and application under one roof with a critical mass. And I think if we made institutions centered on that, they would be a major pull for global talent and get us back to the front of the technological race. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, James. Lots of questions coming in. Please keep them coming in as people are speaking. Priya, we're going to move over to you now. And Priya, range, again, similar to Tabitha, huge number of hats, but kind of role that you're probably most commonly known for is your role as Consul General to Silicon Valley and a range of tech roles, currently on the investor side, policy side, etc. So Priya, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam, and pleasure to be here. So I guess I wanted to start with Silicon Valley because we often in the UK slightly obsess about the Valley. There's lots to learn from Silicon Valley, and we should absolutely be replicating what they've done well. But what we actually need to think about is what can we do better? Where can we take the best of the Valley and then actually do things slightly differently? There are things that those tech ecosystems have not done well in the past, and I think areas like inclusivity are prime examples. So we can actually take what they've done and do it better. Looking beyond that, one of the things that actually Silicon Valley has done very well is, of course, around the funding landscape. And I was delighted to see in the minister's remarks yesterday that he referenced the big push that we're having here in the UK to bring together the City of London much closer to the innovation ecosystem. It is a source of intense frustration, even though many of them are my friends, that actually the pension funds we see funding UK innovation are not the powerhouses of the city, but ones from the States, ones from Canada and from elsewhere. We need to change that because the reality is the science that we want to be commercialized and scaled requires long-term patient capital. And at the moment, we don't have enough of that long-term patient capital here in the UK. If you're looking actually at some of the things that I don't think anyone's quite got right yet, it's actually around the area of interdisciplinarity. And John talked a little bit about this in his remarks earlier. The reality is when we're looking at the best new breakthroughs of science, they're no longer just going to be created from someone with a specific sectoral expertise. They're actually going to take lots of different perspectives coming together to make something successful. And that is actually something that we could really hone in on here on the UK, but also not just see interdisciplinarity as a definition of something around academia, but also that link to business. We still have a cultural barrier between business and academia, and it needs to be much more of a seamless interchange between academics, business, and allow people to develop skills that will apply in both sectors throughout their career. Looking beyond that, one of the things that many have referenced already, and indeed Mr. Freeman did so in his remarks yesterday, we have to put talent, people at the core of whatever we do, whether with Horizon or through Plan B. The reality is, and James just talked about it now in terms of junior scientists, we have incredible talent that is not being properly served here in the UK. But also we need to retain our ability to be a magnet for global talent wherever they are in the world. And we make that too hard at the moment. So that's a real opportunity to bring people to the core and center of whatever we do going forwards. And last but not least, the point that I wanted to mention was really around reinforcing comments that Tabitha made, but indeed Minister Freeman also referenced yesterday. The biggest problems we have globally are actually problems where science can provide the solution. And this is not just in what you might see conventionally as a scientific issue, but actually areas, I think the Minister referenced water scarcity and the relation that has to geopolitical conflict. We need to actually have science as the solution to many of the problems that society will face in the days, months, and years ahead. But the only way we will do that is if we both have an inclusive approach to bring people through to contribute to those ideas and be part of the solutions. But also if we remember, as Tabitha rightly pointed out earlier, that we are using innovation to serve society. So none of this works if we don't take the time to communicate what we're doing and to ensure the benefits of those innovation ambition. That innovation ambition is being brought to bear both to individuals across the whole of the UK, but indeed to individuals across the whole world. And I think that is a real responsibility that all of those of us here on this call need to think about. Thanks, Adam.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Priya. Okay, we're going to go for two more contributions. I'm going to go Richard, and then we've been joined by Lord Willits. So Lord Willits will come to you just after that. So Richard Jones from the University of Manchester, as I said, leading kind of physicist in his own right, but also doing a lot of work with Innovation GM on some of the work about how to do translational research, ensuring that R&D makes it into businesses and into the public sector in Manchester. So Richard, over to you.
Great, well, thank you. And I'm talking to you, in fact, from Oldham Town Hall, which of course is very on brand for Onward, I think, and maybe for myself too. And I want to start with where the Minister finished, which is, you know, what we're talking about when we're talking about science superpower. I think it's part of that broader question of how the UK finds its place in the world now. And so the UK represents about 3%, or a bit less than 3% of the world's high-tech economy. So, you know, it's not the United States, it's not China. James mentioned, you know, I think correctly, some sense that the UK is lagging to world leaders, but nonetheless, I think it does have a real potential competitive advantage in the strength of its science base, but the strength of its science base as measured by academic metrics. And so I think the big challenge, and this really is summed up in the Minister's phrase, Innovation Nation, is how we apply science strength to the critical issues the UK and indeed the world faces. And we've heard about some of them already. I'll focus a bit about productivity growth, the stagnant productivity growth. I mean, I personally shared Tabitha's conviction that, you know, this wrenching transition to a net zero energy economy is going to be really crucial. We've got to ensure good health outcomes for all our citizens. And, you know, we do have to worry about national security in what looks like a very frightening world at the moment. But I want to come back to productivity, because I don't think you can stress enough how much the stagnation of productivity growth that set in 2008 and has continued to this day, how much that productivity stagnation underlies pretty much all the difficulties the country faces now. Difficulties of stagnant wages, the fiscal difficulties the government has, the difficulties in funding public services to the standard people expect. And so I kind of, you know, as the Minister said, it's to get economic growth back, we need to be accelerating progress in high-tech sectors. But there's actually a paradox here. And the economist Diane Coyle, a colleague of mine in the Productivity Institute, has analysed the productivity slowdown. And what we actually find is the biggest contributors to the slowdown are exactly those high-tech sectors that we think should be our strength. So if we take pharmaceuticals, for example, a major sector for the UK, as Sir John has said, Between 1998 and 2008, productivity growth was about 0.6% a year, so very, very healthy growth. Actually, between 2009 and 2019, productivity in the pharmaceutical sector in the UK fell. It fell by an average of 0.2% a year. So we need to do something different. What we're doing isn't working. Both Sir John and Tabitha talked about mission-driven research. I think that's part of it. James highlighted the need for institutional change. I agree with them on that too, and I kind of very much welcome ARIA as a chance to try and experiment with different funding mechanisms. I think money is important. The government spending uplift is real. It's significant in scale. I think the science community needs to welcome that. But I guess, speaking from Oldham, the biggest and most welcome change that the minister talked about was this new focus on place and clusters across the UK, because the UK really is two nations. It's a high-performing Northern European economy down in the Greater Southeast, but outside there in the North and the Midlands and Wales, you've got places whose economies are more comparable to Southern Italy or Portugal than an advanced country. And we've got big cities like Birmingham, Greater Manchester, Glasgow, where the productivity is actually below the UK average. And this just isn't normal. In most developed countries, it's big cities that drive the national economy. So the question I ask is, why can't Manchester be more like Munich, a similar sized city in Germany, which is actually one of that country's innovation hubs? I can say if it was, it would be about 40 billion a year more value generated to the UK. So it's a huge waste of potential. We need to identify those nascent clusters, but work with those places to build up their innovation capacity, build industrial R&D, attract in the investment, so you can give people in places like Oldham the opportunity that the minister talks about to take part in this high-tech economy. And it's not just about money. We do health research to support the health of our citizens as well as to create economic value. And, the Oxford vaccine, a fantastic and brilliant example of that. But even pre-pandemic, a man born in Oldham in 2016 could expect to live for 58 healthy years, whereas a man in Oxfordshire could expect 68.3 years. So that's 10 lost years. I mean, the human cost of those years of ill health and premature death is huge, but so is the economic cost. And it's these poor health outcomes that are a major contributor to the productivity gap that we see in places like Oldham. So that's something that R&D should do something about. That would be innovation for the nation. So I think we have to, I should say, none of this should take away from the huge power of the great research centres we've got in Cambridge and Oxford. That really is a super cluster. It's a massive asset for the nation, and it's really important to sustain that science strength in those places. But the question is, how can we build on those, spread those benefits out to the rest of the country? There's plenty of great spin-outs from Cambridge and Oxford. We need them to scale up in the UK, not feel they have to move to Germany or to California and to succeed. So why shouldn't their first factory be in Rochdale or Rotherham or Dudley or Stoke-on-Trent? So I think, yeah, absolutely, we should aspire to be an innovation nation. But to build that, we need innovation cities, innovation regions all across the UK. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. And finally, we're going to turn to Lord David Willetts, previous Minister for Universities and Science, currently leading at the Resolution Foundation, and again, a range of other hats around the tech and science world. So Lord Willetts, we'd love your reflections.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Adam. And I mean, a lot of really important points have been made. I'd just like to offer a couple of quick comments on them. I agree with the point that James Phillips was making about the need for a kind of greater range of types of institutions. And also, John Bell warned about just having a classic picture of research. We should remember how much we, and speaking as a member of the political class, how we actually partly drive this problem by the way we describe research excellence. Every time I hear about our top universities, and we've got 4 in the top 10 universities, we are rewarding a system of assessing research excellence that is absolutely focused on getting articles by Nobel Prize winners in prestigious journals. That is what we mean when we say a top university. And there are other places where applied research happens, and even the American West Coast and East Coast, even Stanford and MIT and Harvard are part of a wider ecosystem, feeding in people who often come to work maybe as professors there, but have actually done their undergraduate first 2 years and perhaps first 4 years somewhere completely different in America. The more we focus solely on a particular form of excellence, we make this problem worse, not better. My second comment, actually, again, and John made this, is that John talks about missions, and I've had long and stimulating discussions with Mariana Mazzucato and others on missions, and they're part of the mix. But again, there are problems if you focus on missions and don't invest in general purpose technologies. And I can remember the low point when all public funding for synthetic biology was about to stop. And I was arguing we actually did need to keep this thing going. It had been something I backed as one of the 8 great technologies. And I was told, but the trouble is, it's not a mission, it's a technology. And there was a moment when that doctrine had become so powerful that general purpose technologies, often the most disruptive, were in danger of losing funding. But often part of their, and you then had to play a game of trying to work out which application you thought was going to be the most useful one from the technology in order to tie into missions. Missions depend on prior investment in general purpose technologies. When Kennedy announced the moonshot, there had already been at least 5 years of American funding of rocket technologies. That's what made the mission possible. He didn't announce a mission, then someone said, oh, I know, we ought to build some rockets to make it possible. So there is a complementarity of missions and technologies. We need both. And then my final comment is just, and I don't know if this is a diversion or this is the elephant in the room, but there is also the great question of whether we associate with Horizon and what happens on Plan B. I think there is a group of people who would say the best way in which the exciting ideas we've just heard from the panelists is to spend all the money that would otherwise have gone Horizon on exactly the kind of things that they are proposing should be done, and that could be how Plan B money is used. What is interesting is how I would say the wider academic community has not yet bought into that, and there's still support for Horizon, which George reflected in his excellent speech yesterday. And why is that? Is it just because they haven't yet gone through the full 5 stages of grief and accepted Brexit and now haven't jumped up to invest in Plan B? I think there are a couple of features of Horizon which are why it still holds an appeal to the academic and research community, which we need to take into account as we develop any alternative. And those are particularly, first of all, it is long-term patient funding. One of the great advantages of these international treaty organizations, be it CERN or Horizon, is you've got a commitment and a funding program that goes beyond the periods of a conventional CSR, a conventional spending review. And people attach a lot of weight to that. And paradoxically, and the Treasury spot this, they're very aware about agreeing to them. One of the purposes of joining an international treaty organization to do science stuff is to some extent delivers you a wider, more patient, long-term funding framework than you would otherwise have. And the second feature of Horizon, of course, is you're not simply marking your own homework. You're not just saying we're doing great stuff. You're up in international competition, but other researchers pitching for money and have to show that your stuff is being assessed as a first rate against a range of competitors not under your domestic control. And that's why I thought what George said of international partnerships is important. We really will know we're a science superpower if either with Horizon or with Japanese and Israeli and Swiss and other assessors, we are still winning in tough international competitions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. So those are all of our opening gambits. We've had kind of questions flooding in. What I'm going to do is pull some out, kind of group them together where there are similar themes, and if it's okay, direct them to particular members of the panel. And I want to start with one that came in from Jack, which was quite pertinent. And if it is the case that we do leave Horizon, or if it is the case that we get more agency over where Horizon funds go, and there is a decision about where to direct some of those funds, and in particular geographically where we direct them. So Jack was asking about, in as much as there is a trade-off with the public pound, Do we concentrate those funds in the Golden Triangle, or do we spread those funds more broadly, is the question Jack has asked. And the minister yesterday, to some degree, said this isn't a trade-off and kind of rejected the premise. But to the degree that there is, Tabitha, I'm going to very awkwardly start with you, given your new Cambridge role. How should we think about that trade-off between where we geographically invest funds?
Yeah, I think that's Jack, a very good question, and I have actually messaged Jack to talk to him about this more. I don't have the answer. You know, I'm 8 days into this new role where the Golden Triangle, you know, I am firmly in the Golden Triangle. My feeling towards this is that the only way to do this is the collaboration route. So we collaborate, we ensure that this is not just a Golden Triangle thing, but completely across the UK, and in each area, it's industry and government funding coming together to make sure that each area has enough of the investment that it needs in order to continue to be the expert in the area that it is. Otherwise, I think that we end up with, you know, a dreadful outcome. I don't think there is an option where you just focus on the Golden Triangle. I really don't. But I think that each cluster area needs to take very seriously how to make themselves the best cluster. And that isn't just government funding. That has to be with collaboration with industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Tabitha. It appears you have Golden Triangle backup because John has just put his hand up, or even from an Oxford perspective. So John, let me bring you in on this question.
Yeah, so I think this is a really central question, but I think it's worth just looking at bits of the world that have attempted to level up, not just in science, but across the whole piece. And the answer is it has happened, and it has happened very successfully. The best example is the leveling up of East Germany when it merged with West Germany. But I just need to remind everybody, it takes a ton of money, and it's new money that it takes. You can't spread the money you used to spend in Munich and send it to the north. That doesn't work at all. So I'm a real fan of bringing on lots of bits of the country, both in science and technology, but across other things. But it'll require a lot of new money. And I think Priya alluded to where that money might actually come from. And that is, we have this massive gap. If you look at the southeast of England, in terms of numbers of startup companies in the biotech and life sciences area, we're not that far behind the West Coast or Boston. But the amount of capital invested is about 10-fold less. So they're all dinky little companies that aren't going to go anywhere. So this issue of filling the gap with more risk capital is crucial. And there, the pension question, which looms very large on this, is really the central issue. Because if we used our pension money properly, there would be lots of money for this kind of investment, and we could use that to actually do the leveling up in a really powerful way and get stuff to happen all over the country. So that my solution is, I'm completely in favor of it, but there's no point in dreaming you can do it without any more money. You've got to have more money to do it, and that's where it'll come from, I think.
And can I ask you a follow-up on that, John? So how do we unlock those pension funds? And I guess as a kind of part B to that question, Tarama has asked about why more city kind of investment doesn't go into science and tech. Has asked, is there a problem of understanding of the opportunities or the types of investment that are more common in the science and tech world? So what do we do about pensions, practically, and why is it that more money from the city isn't going into science?
Yeah, so that's sort of, they're partly the same question, but let me talk. I could bore you to death about pensions, which I won't do, because I know more about pensions than I ever wanted to know. But the problem with pensions goes back to the Maxwell problem, where Maxwell scarpered with the pension funds from Pergamum Press and then fell off his boat in the Mediterranean. And then everybody reacted and said, oh my God, these pensions are at risk. So what happened, and this is a crucial question, a crucial point, is that everybody with a pension scheme was told that they had to put on their balance sheet the liabilities of their pension scheme. So if you were running British Airways, flying planes back and forth, you suddenly found on your balance sheet this massive liability of the pension schemes, and the liability goes up and down with the discount rate. So just from that perspective, everybody said, well, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to put our money in the safest possible investments. And that meant gilts. So most of our pensions are in gilts. They return about 2%. And guess what? They don't pay everybody's pensions. So the pension system has gone upside down. And so you have to break that link between the balance sheet and the pension liabilities and the corporate balance sheets. And the Canadians have done this hugely successfully. CPPIB, the Ontario Teachers Pension, these have been created, and the Canadians have fantastic direct benefit pensions. And they also have a huge sovereign wealth fund created by the pension money that goes into everything you would like, including startup economy. So, I mean, that's your answer for pensions, but trying to get people to listen to that has proved to be rather difficult. But anyway, that I hope that didn't bore everybody too much.
Not at all. We could make this an entire pension session. Priya, we'll come to you, and then Richard, I want to bring you in. And just these kind of two questions, if we can hold these together on our heads, one about geographically where we invest, and then the other about the mechanisms we might use to invest. Priya.
Absolutely. I just wanted to pick up one point on the back of what John was rightly explaining there as the challenges with pensions. There is, as I understand it, a very specific challenge to pension funds in the UK becoming LPs in venture capital funds. Essentially, the 2 and 20 model, the model for a venture capital fund to operate, is not permitted under UK pensions legislation. So there is actually a commitment from the government, and it's my understanding, to be trying to update that specific piece of legislation, which will then open up more pension funds to be engaging in funds where they charge that sort of management fee that you get conventionally in the VC fund. So just wanted to sort of bring that specific challenge in, but I understand that is sort of, top of the list in terms of things that could happen in terms of government commitments. Just coming back to this point, and I think, Jack is rightly pointing out a challenge here, but I do want to push back on this. I fundamentally believe that actually the success of the Golden Triangle has a very, very strong connection and possibility to bring success to the rest of the UK. It is not a zero-sum game. And actually, one of the challenges that I see, and Jack's rightly highlighting by asking the question, is that we just don't articulate this well. We don't actually describe, back to the points that some of us were making in the remarks earlier, we don't communicate the benefits of having a mutually reinforcing national ecosystem. And that's something we could really spend more time on prioritizing as we go forward.
Fantastic. Richard.
Yeah, I think that the stressing the difference between different kinds of research and different kinds of funding is crucial here. And the biggest divide is between public funding and private funding. And we know there's a very powerful relationship between public funding and private funding. And, the success of, Cambridge in particular, well, Cambridge and Oxford, is that they have very high public sector funding, which is then followed by enormous quantities of private sector funding. So that's absolutely the outcome that we want to see. If we look at places like the Midlands, like the Northwest, what you end up with actually is there's actually quite a lot of private sector R&D, but proportionally less public sector R&D. And there, this is essentially, the market is giving us signals and we're ignoring them. That we could be capturing the spillovers from R&D more effectively. We could be generating the critical mass of skilled people that make a cluster work by responding to those market signals. So I think that it's understanding the relationship between public and private is important. Of course, we like to say it's not a zero-sum game. In an ideal world, it isn't, but it's still AstraZeneca up and moved from Macclesfield to Cambridge, and I'm sure that's a great comfort to the people who rely on house prices in Cambridge keep on going up. Cheshire still retains a strong life sciences cluster. That all's not lost, but that's the sort of thing that happens. That's how we all get more unbalancing unless we do think more seriously and more carefully about how we keep both, the private innovation systems outside the Golden Triangle working, how we build them more. And I'm with Tabitha. I think that there's huge potential to spread the benefits of the great science in Oxford and Cambridge outside. I think we can do that. There are things that are going to be easier to do in Greater Manchester or in the West Midlands than it's possible to do in Cambridge or Oxford. And those are the places where we should be seeking to build kind of complementary centres that add up to a more than the sum of the parts as a national system.
I want to move us to a question about kind of our international relationships. And there are a cluster of questions that have come in that essentially are a bit of a reality check. So it's saying, is it realistic to assume that without infrastructure like Horizon, we can form the sort of multilateral relationships or have the sort of multilateral system that we might need? Have we underinvested too much over the past 20 years? Has Brexit dented confidence in the country too much? Are we really being too optimistic and too boosterish and not realistic enough about the types of relationships that we might be able to form? Lord Willetts, I want to come to you on that question first, and then James, I want to come to you given the kind of benchmarking that you described in your remarks. Should we be more realistic about what we can achieve internationally, whether we're in or outside of Horizon?
Well, we certainly have to build up new types of international partners. And look, I think it's doable, and I think it's great that George is ambitious, and there's an obvious list, and it's got Israel and Switzerland and Japan and Australia and Canada and US, of course, as well, we hope, as building up links, including bilateral ones with European countries. But it does take time, and it involves accepting that some supranational body has to take grant decisions. It can't, otherwise you haven't got that extra kudos. And that process is not rapid. And that's why I think for Plan B, what the government is now doing, which is trying to keep ERC money rolling over, is better than saying we're completely going to sort of burn our bridges and give up on it. I think what we're seeing at the moment is quite an interesting compromise, where the Treasury guarantee for ERC money has been carried on, but at the same time, and congratulations to him, George Freeman managed to secure some money that wasn't being spent in Horizon to use for other purposes, £500 million or so last autumn. That, I suspect, is the way that policy will go. And if I may just comment, going back on our pensions, there are two particular problems in addition to ones that John talked about. They're too small, and you take much greater risk if you're big, and we had to have an aggressive policy of aggregating our pension funds, which involves government taking powers it doesn't have. And secondly, they're closed, and closed ones have more conservative investment strategies than ones that are open. We made the terrible mistake of fully closing our defined benefit schemes rather than changing their terms. Canada has not closed its old DB schemes. And that is beyond, sadly, the sort of Charles Roxburgh agenda. And then you can have a strategy on place. You can have a strategy. And there are programs, Strength in Places, which we developed at UKRI, Launchpad, which Innovate UK developed before that, which try to identify clusters around a technology or a mission in a particular place. But if you are terrified of ever taking a view on anything, which is the terrible thing that blights British innovation policy, and you need to have brave ministers like George who are willing to take you. If you're terrified of taking a view, all you ever have is so-called horizontal policies, like handing out smart grants, which take no view on technology, take no view on place, and just say, we'll write you a check if we're good. And basically, the Treasury prefer that type of policy. The Treasury prefer anything that doesn't actually involve taking a substantive view. And that is why, incidentally, they're not going to aggregate these pension funds and use them in the way that we described. They'll settle for something on the fringes of how much fees you can be charged for a certain function. Why, when they put money in, they put money into VC funds other people have already created. They don't use them to shape a strategy. So you just got to have the confidence to be strategic.
I feel unfair not giving the Treasury a right to reply there, but they're not on the call, so there we go. James, so the same question to you in terms of internationally, can we kind of punch above our weight, or the weight that we are somewhat assuming in the way that we're describing what the UK can do, or do we need to be more realistic about where we are?
I think, yeah, there's a number of themes that have come out there, and I agree completely with what Lord Willetts said about the pension schemes and the Treasury and what Priya said. I mean, the pension issue was high on the agenda when I was there. There doesn't really seem to have been any significant movement on that. And I think more broadly, Lord Willett spoke about the conservative nature of the Treasury. The key word there is strategy. I think anything which involves choices and strategy is extremely difficult to do in government, given the way the Treasury operates. Any decision made that influences spending is micromanaged by the Treasury. The Treasury doesn't have science and technology expertise. So what you essentially have is a collection of accountants and generalists dictating R&D policy. And I don't think you can have a serious strategy until there's serious reform in the Treasury. With respect to the point the point about global collaboration, I think what I would emphasize is the need to emphasize a small number of strong partnerships rather than doing lots and lots of them. Start small, start with a small focused effort, work out how to do this. If there's one area that's come up that I can't comment smartly on particularly, it would be this one, because it's a very difficult and thorny challenge, but I would pick a small number, 3 or 4 countries to really build detailed relationships with. And just to come to something which Richard said around the levelling up, I agree with the public-private investment differences in the north, though a lot of that is driven by a small number of very large companies, for example, aerospace companies. If we're going to do levelling up, it's important to be focused. And I would agree with Richard that Manchester would be a great place to make a big bet. I think there is, again, a general tendency to spread things out, to even things out, not make choices, as Lord Willett said. If we're going to do it, we should pick a small number of places to really invest behind. And that's contrary to the general way in which bureaucracies work, and that will require leadership.
And I'm gonna pick up where James kind of led off in terms of the small number of sectors, and also Lord Willett's point about bravery, because we have a range of conversations, of questions that have come in about, are we investing enough in X or in Y? So a question on life sciences, a question on AI, a question on manufacturing. So I guess the question I want to ask the panel is, what are some of those big strategic bets that we should be putting our weight behind when it comes to international collaborations? If we take James's challenge, what are some of those small areas, a small number of countries we go for? What are the most likely candidates there, and where should we be focusing our efforts? Richard, let me come to you first.
Yeah, no, that you silenced me there. I think, yeah, strategy is always important. I think there are 2 things to do with international relations, and I do want to come back to a point that David made, because I think it's really important. And it's the question of, why does everybody like the ERC so much? It is because that if you get an ERC grant, that has been through an enormously rigorous process where, I've sat on an ERC advanced grants panel for the last 3 rounds, and, it just slightly, I feel awed by the fact I'm sitting around a table with not just European experts, experts from the US will take part in that process, and you have 2 weeks of really substantial science discussion that really makes you really confident that what you're funding is genuinely internationally competitive. So that, in a sense, the ERC is an ideal mechanism for doing what David stressed, which is the importance of keeping options open and keeping general purpose technologies on the go. So that's part of it. On the other hand, okay, so but what do we want to concentrate on? Well, we want to concentrate on doing those things that are going to solve those problems that are heading to us like a freight train. I really don't think that people appreciate what a wrenching transition going to net zero is. We feel pretty good about having got quite a lot of wind power going. We're going to lose all our nuclear fission bar 1 by 2030. We're currently still running at about 80% fossil fueled energy economy. So I don't think we've understood quite how much we need innovation to drive the cost down and the scale up of those new technologies. So, if there's one thing that you're going to focus on, it's that. Of course, then you have to focus within that, because, there's a great tendency to say, oh, well, yeah, hydrogen is fantastic. We've got to do hydrogen. Of course, that's not an answer. There's, what do you make it from? What do you use it for? How does this slot into the existing energy economy you've got? How does this fit into what's happening in the world? So that I think that there's a lot of detailed work to be done in understanding, again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, what is the UK's place in the world? What are the things that it can do?
Tabitha, let me come to you on this question. So AI was one of the things we were asked about. What should some of those big strategic bets internationally be?
I think we have it won't surprise anyone. I'm gonna say, because I said this when I first started, the climate crisis is not just a galvanizing thought. It is something that we have, as I said, 7 years to remain below 1.5 degrees. There is almost no more important thing for us to point technology at and create technology to solve. And so I think that could galvanize the whole nation. And there's a good question from an anonymous attendee at sort of 10 to 5, asking why can't we galvanize the whole UK around a similar one topic, so therefore we are the same size as a Boston or a California, and I think that is something that we could use. And obviously it won't surprise anyone that I think that the adoption of AI within the green net zero space is one of the key areas. It not only allows us to lean on our academic powerhouse, the global impact we've already have with companies like DeepMind, Darktrace, GraphCore, the collaboration that we have been able to do with AI across things like Global Partnership on AI, our soft power with the fact that many countries collaborate and look to us for our ethics and regulation, and the fact that it excites the nation. We have now 2 million people creating DALL-E images every day. It's awesome.
John, let me come to you for a final answer to this question. Some of the big strategic bets we should be making.
Yeah, so first of all, I think because it's science, it's really risky to decide what you should be doing, because the opportunities appear in a stochastic way. And so you have to have a certain amount of stuff going on that actually will create those opportunities, and not end up committing yourself to a limited set of opportunities. Having said that, I do also think that if we are going to push particular themes or areas, we should do them in addition to the general support. We should do them in areas where we know we're really competitive on a global scene. This is I can speak for life sciences. This is really competitive now. Everybody wants a piece of life sciences, particularly post-COVID. And so if we don't support and back that, we'll soon drift down the lead. We're quite close to the top of the tree at the moment, but it'll disappear very quickly. So you pick the areas where we know where we've got a legacy of expertise, we've got lots of great young people, we've got lots of good labs, and we've got in the commercial sector activity in that space. So that's how I would go about making the choice.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Well, this is usually where I would make some closing remarks, but one of our attendees should probably be allowed to. So I think I'm allowed to bring this person in. There we are. So the Science Minister was keen to make a couple of closing remarks and outline next steps for the session. So George, I hope you can hear us and you're able to turn your microphone and camera on. And I'm very happy, George, given this was a two-parter that you opened, to give you the chance to say the final word.
Adam, thank you so much. And can I just first by thanking Onward, Seb Payne, for putting this together. I'm really pleased that my speech yesterday has provoked such an incredibly high quality conversation, and the online debate, that was the aim. It wasn't just to give a speech, it was to get this conversation really going. And it's been a brilliant session. I think people would love to go on. Thank you. Onward have been a great think tanks come and go, but you're on fire, both on the levelling up piece, but also the science and tech piece. So it's great. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I think firstly, what I've been hugely cheered by this last day, week, few months, the level of national public interest in this agenda. And I think it is partly the pandemic, to John's point. I think if you ask a lot of people in this country, they're quite depressed about the world, about this country, about the world we're in. I think if you ask them what were the most inspiring moments of the last 10 years, many would say Her Majesty the Queen's Jubilee, the Olympics, and the pride in the pandemic response. When you see the whole of Wimbledon rise to cheer Sarah Gilbert and all the people involved, that goes to the core of what this country, the people in this country want this country to be about. And so I think there's something really powerful in there. And the level of cross-party support for this agenda is huge. So I'm really pleased by that. And I think in some ways as a minister, my best legacy would be if whoever forms the next government carries on with this agenda, because the last thing anyone needs is, chopping and changing. And I think, second point, the really key essay question that I've tried to frame is, in a world where China's doing 240 billion a year and America 300 billion, and we aren't in Horizon at the moment, I'm hoping the phone might ring, but we're going to 20, which is amazing. It's great. We're putting, it's a 30% increase. We're putting in 11 billion extra in these 3 years, 30 billion in 5 years. But to be a player, we're going to have to be more collaborative and international. And, you know, I think this is an opportunity for us to answer the question, how do you turn 30 billion extra government into 60, 70 extra billion private? And I think there's a mixture there of, there's a wall of money internationally that wants to invest in companies, in funds, in infrastructure, in the whole broader science and technology innovation ecosystem. And I don't think we've made it very easy for them to invest. And part of my thinking on clusters is, wouldn't it be great if you could say to people, look, do you want to take a 10% stake in the South Coast Marine Technology Cluster? And it'll give you access to options on spin-outs. You can fund the science park. You can, you know, we form a commercial proposition. So I'm sure that those clusters are part of balancing alongside the sectors, the attractiveness of international money. But also more than that, I think they are the key to making this economy something that genuinely goes around the country and creates opportunity for everyone. The Golden Triangle is absolutely golden, as I made it clear yesterday, but I think we've got little triangles, corridors all around the country taking shape, and they feed off that Golden Triangle. And I think on the international piece, I'm very struck that, you know, I don't think I've won this debate yet with the research community. When I started, I think it was 90% just get us back into Horizon, and 10% were interested in what Plan B might look like. I think it feels more like, you know, 60-40 now. I think a lot of people are saying just doing nothing is the worst of all worlds. Sitting here benched is terrible. So there's a growing support, I think, for deploying that Horizon money, not shutting the door. And I've been very clear, we're not shutting the door. But this year, next year, if we get on and do some exciting stuff, I think the chances are that the EU will say, yeah, pick up the phone, let's get the Brits back in, and actually might be able to improve Horizon. And I make that point because when I looked at the Horizon, 3 pillars, talent, obviously key, industrial global challenges, we do quite well, but not that well. I mean, Rolls-Royce gets some money, quite a lot of little projects, they're good, but it's not big money. And the innovation pillar, we get very little actually, given that we're an innovation economy. I think there's an opportunity to really do some big talent stuff. Second pillar, much bolder innovation, more DARPA, Bell Labs, international moonshots. And then the global piece, yeah, the bilats, but also the multilats. I'm being realistic about areas where we are really strong. And I'm just mooting areas. To me, the polar research piece, we're viewed as international leaders. The agri-tech piece, huge. Safe space, huge. But here's the real point, I think, Adam. In the end, I think we have to choose. And to have a strategy, you know, I used to run startups and you've got a tiny bit of money and not much time. You can't do it all. You have to choose. It's a massive risk. You've got to keep the door open and keep watching what everyone else is doing. And I think that somebody asked me yesterday, Minister, what do you think is the biggest challenge to this agenda? And I said, I think we've lost in this country, in Whitehall, in the political class, we've lost the sort of courage of our own convictions to take a decision and back it. And that doesn't mean backing John DeLorean or British Leyland, making some daft corporatist propping up of a failing company. It's about picking a sector like life sciences and going for it. And I'm very struck that if you look back at the countries that have really done this, you know, America with the Manhattan Project, they didn't do 5 other things. They did Manhattan for 15 years. Then they did NASA, and it was the defining mission, and it drove 50 years of technology leadership. Little Britain, we probably, at the moment, I think we're stuck doing a little bit of everything. And I think David put his finger on it. We have to rediscover the muscle memory in government and across this country, political economy, to make a choice. I think if Harold Wilson, if Winston Churchill came to the UK now, they'd say, in the 50s, the 60s, we were doing rockets, we were doing space, we were doing Concorde. What have you guys been doing for the last 40 years? And I think I think that's the big issue is what do we choose, and how does ministers, Prime Minister, Cabinet, how do we win the political support for making those choices? Because it's a balance between seeing where the science takes us and seeing where the global demand is. But I think there's some sectors we can see them. We're good at it. And if we take some big decisions, I think we could really deliver this agenda and unleash prosperity, but also more importantly, probably hope for a new generation that this country's best days are ahead of it, solving global challenges.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Minister. Really appreciate the guest appearance. Thank you. And as you said, this series of events was not about being the final word in this conversation, but kicking it off, framing it, making sure we were clear on the contours. And I think both with yesterday's speech and today's session, we've done that. And hopefully Onward can continue to support that conversation with our research, with our evidence, and keep things moving forward. So all that's left for me to say is thank you so much to our fantastic panel. We were delighted at reasonably short notice to pull together such a fantastic group. And thank you so much. To have 300 or 400 people on a webinar about international science is the sort of thing that warms my heart. So I appreciate all of you joining. Have a fantastic evening and hopefully see you all soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, Adam. See you soon.